Hey guys, good morning. What we have before us, definitely a little bit chilly here today, but what a great opportunity as we go through Mark. The last part of chapter 2 is where we're going to be at today. Jesus is about to have a kind of another run-in with the Pharisees. We see that he's constantly being tested. His theology is being tested. All those things are getting put to the test. And here we are at verse 23. It says this. Now it happened that he went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and as they went, his disciples began to pluck the heads of grain. And the Pharisees said to him, "Look, why do they do what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" But he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and hungry, he and those with him? Uh, how he went into the house of God on the days of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the showbread, which is not lawful to eat, except for the priests, and also gave him some to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. Therefore, the Son of Man is also the Lord, the Sabbath." So to give some perspective, right? They're picking grain, just walking through a field, eating it, and the idea there was that you're doing work. And the Sabbath, there was just countless laws, countless rules, and all other things that they added on top of that to define what work was going to be. And what it did is it really complicated a relationship with God. There was so many complications. You had to do this, you had to do this, you had to do this, and then you had to, and the approach and attitude towards God was something that was overwhelming for a common person to even attempt to take on. And in this scenario, they catch him, right? They catch the disciples, they catch Jesus, and they're picking heads of grain, they're eating, and that work would have been a big deal. And clearly, Jesus being the of that group would have been directly responsible for allowing, and Jesus kind of shuts him down, right? He says, don't you, like, there was that time when David was running from the enemy. They were all absolutely exhausted, tired, and worn out. The only measure of food that was available at that particular time was the showbread in the temple, which was set aside to be holy for the priests. But ultimately, the priests gave it to David, gave it to the men, understanding that it was not about just pure obedience in an outward sense, but rather there's a heart thing that has to go on. That would be greater to serve the Lord by giving this to David than by keeping it for the priest at that particular time. And so what should we grab hold of on this? We've got to be so careful not to make our relationship with the Lord so complicated. We can have all kinds of little rituals and things that we do throughout the day, like, oh, this is what God's going to want. I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. And we start to say the word "I got to." That's really the difference, right? I got to make sure that I'm not going to pick wheat on the Sabbath day. Rather than I get to, right? It's just a subtle change in terms, subtle change in a word. And now what things do is I now have a sense of it moves from obligation to a heart, right? And so our service to the Lord must not be out of obligation, but rather it's much more simple when it's just out of a heart. We can see that there are still many things that we need to abstain from and things which we ought to do. And we can make that a ritualistic sort of experience for us to go through and make sure we check all the boxes. Or we live with such a heart obedient to God that we don't have to worry about a bunch of check boxes because our heart is inclined to just want to serve and please the Lord. And therefore, the checks get checked, right? And our heart is going to be where it needs to be. And that's what he's drawing us to. And he says, you know what? The Sabbath, this is not something that God made. It's not that was made for men, not man for the Sabbath. God made it specifically for man to have rest. That was the concept. That was the heart behind God's creation of the Sabbath. It wasn't that man was created to then fulfill the Sabbath. and to follow those rules. And so that's the difference. So I wanted to just challenge you as we finish up. What are some of the things that maybe you feel like you got to do? That if you don't do this and you don't do that, or if you do this, you got to do this, you got to do this, right? And then you just kind of have that sense that I've got to do this, and it's a checklist form of religion, right? What are those things, right? Take a second and just pray about that. And then what we want to do is we want to ask the Lord to give us a heart where it now is not a got to and not a checklist, but rather a get to, because our heart is inclined to do simply the work of the Lord. And we don't complicate our relationship with God. The church should not complicate people's relationship with God. There's no need for complication when it comes to the Lord, just a simple heart of obedience. I love you guys. Be encouraged today, and I pray that that the Lord will challenge you with the got tos and the difference between a head ritualistic attitude, heart attitude in which we might do things or abstain from things. See you tomorrow.